Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 24th level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turfin. I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf ranger, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing on this lovely Sunday, good sir?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm drinking my second cup of coffee with my, of course, iconic Legend of Zelda Link to the Past.
Look how fancy that
mug.
is.
But I'm ready to talk some video games today, bud. This is going to be good.
Same here. I think we've got a pretty good topic on today's show because we're going to be talking all about the Shin Megami Tensei series, and I think we're going to have a really discussion today. But before we get into the main discussion, of course, we got to clear the dungeon of the trash, the pesky mobs, all the people that get in the way on our way to the boss. So folks at home, if you would like to support the show, there's a number of ways to do that. Number one, subscribe to us on your podcast feed of choice. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. We're on all the things, all the places that you find podcasts. So you can check us out there. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That definitely helps out the show get discovered by new people. So definitely leave a review there. Also, if you want to see our beautiful faces every single Saturday morning, because we put up a video version of the show over on YouTube, head on over to youtube.com/YumiCapri, and you can subscribe there, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff that YouTubers tell you to do. And then last but not least, if you want to get the show a little bit early, you can head on over to patreon.com/YumiCapri is how you go do that. You get early access to this and all of our shows, as well as some exclusive content. And I teased last week as well that we did a in-person podcast with both Matt Sawinski and myself and Sean Capri for the Yumi Capri podcast. So you definitely don't want to miss that. Last thing, Extra Life is happening at the time you're listening to this, though. We're kind of in the thick of it. I've already had my live stream by the time you're hearing this, where I played a whole bunch of RPGs. But then Sean is streaming today, the day this episode comes out. So make sure to go support him. He's live in Rome, New York, over on twitch.tv/Sean Capri. I've also listed all of our donation links in the show notes for all the charities that we're supporting. Both with myself and Sean are also doing that, but as well as some of the fine folks over at PSVG. And I've left all their links as well in the show notes as well. So if you want to donate to a good cause, maybe win some prizes along the way, it's definitely probably going to be worth it. So check us out there at the links below. All right. It's finally time, Garret, to read from the sacred text, and we got a doozy today. So Shin Megami Tensei, a long-running series going all the way back to the Famicom. And I'm just excited to talk about this series with you, Garret, especially because, believe it or not, and you might have actually expected otherwise, I'm actually probably a lot newer to the series than you are. Like, I don't have as much experience with the series, I think, than you have. But I guess we'll get into it when we talk about some of the games, because I haven't played all the Shin Megami Tensei games or anything like that. I mostly got interested in it because of Persona, which was a spinoff of Shin Megami Tensei, or at least that's kind of how it started. We talked about a lot on the Persona episode. But we should probably get into the fun facts, Garret, because otherwise this show is going to take forever because there's a lot of fun facts today. So obviously there are 11 core games in the Shin Megami Tensei series, with the 12th Shin Megami Tensei 5 releasing this Friday from the time that you're actually listening to this on November 12th exclusively on Nintendo Switch. If you include the remakes and spin-offs, not including Persona, because that's kind of its own thing at this point, that brings the number to 25 total games, with Shin Megami Tensei 5's arrival on Friday, which is pretty awesome. And then again, if you throw Persona in there, and if you include them all as one series, Garret, you'd be at almost 50 games. Yeah, 50 games, sure. That's kind of ridiculous. That's a lot of games to go through, which obviously we don't have time to play of all these games, especially because the Shin Megami Tensei series specifically is very Japan focused, and you're going to kind of see that
Japan focused
as we go through the fun facts. So first off, the series itself was not called Shin Megami Tensei. It was just Megami Tensei to start with in Japan. And they later released it, renamed it to Shin Megami Tensei with the intention of marketing the game internationally. I don't know why they needed to add the Shin to it, but sure.
I don't know is there a meaning to this? Is there like a Japanese translation of Shin Megami Tensei, or is it just random words?
I tried to look up, some semblance of reason behind that move, and that was all. I couldn't really find anything. I just found that was they for some reason felt it would work better with 3 words instead of 2 for international audiences. I don't know, man. it's Atlas. They do weird things sometimes.
They do very weird things.
Believe it or not, Garrett, and I don't know if you knew this, but the series itself actually started as a licensed game and not necessarily as its own original property. So the very first game in the series, Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei, was based off a trilogy of science fiction novels called Digital Devil Story by Aya Nishitani. And basically, this was like this long-running series of books where it was about this protagonist in this post-apocalyptic Tokyo, and he basically, recruited demons. Which again, probably sounds pretty familiar when you're thinking about the games. Yeah.
So is that a manga series or a book?
No, actual novels.
Like a novel.
Actual novels.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So it was the games themselves were first released on the MSX and PCs sometime in July of 1987. I tried to find an exact date in July, but all I could really find in my research was July of 1987, with a Famicom version coming later that year on September 11th. The game itself was a first-person dungeon-crawling RPG that allowed you to recruit your enemies by offering them money or items, which, again, it was based off some of the themes from the novel series. But, of course, we now know them as kind of being some of the core designs of the gameplay in the Megami Tensei series going forward. It later got a sequel on the Famicom as well, Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei 2, which was released 3 years later on April 6th, 1990. Both games in the series also got Super Famicom ports in 1995. Again, all of this is Japan only, Garrett. That's why I'm not talking about North American dates for any of this stuff.
And no US yet, or Canadian.
We'll talk about that when we kind of get to it, because that's coming pretty soon in this discussion. The very first game, though, to bear the Shin Megami Tensei name was simply titled Shin Megami Tensei, which arrived on the Super Famicom on October 30th, 1992. It did eventually get a North American version, Garrett, on iOS, of all things, of all platforms, on March 18th, 2014. So
that was the first one?
Yeah, the very first Shin Megami Tensei game.
Oh, the Shin Megami Tensei game actually coming to the... Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I understand now.
So they changed the name to market it internationally, but the very first time that game got released here was in 2014. So 22 years later.
So they decided to wait 18 years or whatever. Or 22 years later. So
yeah, which is ridiculous. The game itself was actually a pseudo remake of Megami Tensei 2, but the story and the gameplay were actually tweaked from the original experience, which, again, makes sense as to why they would actually port the second one from Famicom to Super Famicom, 3 years later, to kind of give you the original experience rather than having to pull out your old dusty Famicom at that point. So a couple years later, in 1994, it brought us two more games in the series, Shin Megami Tensei 2 and its very first spin-off, Shin Megami Tensei If ... And yes, the ... dots are in the title for the game, which we talked about back on the Persona episode. That was the game that really inspired the Persona series. Like it took place in a school and you had a bunch of choices and it kind of had the day-to-day system that Persona has. So that's what kind of like spun off that entire series, which was interesting. And then after that, it took about 9 years before the next release in the series, which was Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, which launched on PlayStation 2 in Japan on February 20th, 2003. But then this one finally came to North America, Garrett. This was our very first entry in the series in North America. Later that year, the next year, so 2004 on October 12th. And then finally, 10 years after that, Garrett, was I think probably your first entry in the series, which was on the 3DS, Shin Megami Tensei 4. It launched on May 23rd, 2013 in Japan, it was actually, I think, a launch title for the 3DS or a launch window title for the console. It was
pretty close, yes. I would deem it launch title. Yeah, for sure.
And then it came to North America on July 16th, 2013. So the same year.
Oh, wait, 2013 for the 3DS? No, that's 2 years later.
Okay.
Never mind. Sorry.
For some reason, I thought the 3DS actually launched in 2012 or 2013, but
it launched in 2011 and did not have any games until I forgot. Mario Kart.
It had the Ambassador games, Garrett. I was playing Fire Emblem: The Secret Stones on my 3DS.
I did have the Ambassador as well, but man, okay. Anyways, yeah.
What about that hit game Ambassador Certificate? I hear that's real good.
I heard it's pretty good too. Only select people have it.
Yeah, and then the last thing to kind of cross off on the fun facts is that Shin Megami Tensei 4 received its own sequel, which was one of the
Yes.
first times in the series that a game actually received a sequel besides the very first game, which was Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse on February 10th, 2016 in Japan, and then later that year on September 20th in North America, again, also on the 3DS, and it kind of continued the story from there. So that's it kind of for the fun facts. For the most part, though, the story with Shin Megami Tensei, kind of similar to something like Final Fantasy, where for the most part, you really don't need to play the other games to kind of understand the story or the world or anything like that. They all kind of have kind of similar themes and mechanics. Like, for example, all these games, for the most part, being post-apocalyptic games that also feature the monster catching ability or monster recruiting abilities, and the dungeon crawling. So that kind of persists over all the games, but they're all pretty different from each other. And then when you start getting to some of the spin-offs, it takes some of those core values and then kind of turns them on their head and adds some new stuff to them. But we'll get into talking about the spin-offs in a little bit because that's kind of its own, can of worms here. So first off, we got to talk about our history with the series, where to start. And of course, we got a couple questions about this. So folks at home, if you would like to have your question answered on this show, you can reach out to us on Twitter at Yumi Capri's. We put up a question post every single Friday afternoon with what the topic is for the week, as well as you can leave us any regular RPG question there. Or if you leave a question on YouTube, like if you're watching on YouTube, we'll answer it on the next week's show. Or if you hit us up on Discord at the Yumi Capri Discord, which is free to join, links in the show notes, you can join us there. Just like Buck at Bucklepuff did on Twitter, who asked the question, this is a series I've been wanting to get into for quite a while. Currently sitting in my backlog are Shin Megami Tensei 3's remaster, Shin Megami Tensei 4, and The Strange Journey Redux, which was kind of like a weird game kind of in the middle on the 3D, on the original DS that came between 3 and 4. Which of these three would you recommend I play first, or should I jump straight into 5? And then Seumas MacIsaac at Famous Seumas also asked the question, where is the best place to start? So Garrett, tell me about your history of the series. Where did you get your start with Shin Megami Tensei?
So as you said, Ryan, I first started with Shin Megami Tensei 4 on 3DS, and I same thing with you. I did not realize what the Shin Megami Tensei series is until I played Persona 4 Golden. And then once I played that up, I was like, okay, what are the other kind of series that are related to this? And then that's when I realized that the parent series or franchise or whatever was Shin Megami Tensei. So I started out with 4, played most of that, and then I played Apocalypse as well for a handful of hours. And then there's some spinoffs in the DS and the 3DS, like I think it was like Devil Summoner 1 and 2, Overclocked on 3DS as well. I played a little bit of Strange Journey Redux, but I did not get really into it. So yeah, I've dabbled in more recent Shin Megami Tensei games on the handheld. And so these are good questions. What is the best game to start with this franchise? So just to stem off of Bug, I think those 3 games are a good start 3 games with the franchise before 5. Right. If you're not going into 5. So Shin Megami Tensei 4, I think it's the most accessible game to get into versus the previous older games.
Yeah, 3 in particular, that game is really hard. It's way harder than I know the series is notoriously hard, but that one in particular is notoriously hard amongst most of the games. So
right. I haven't played too much, or I haven't played much at all with Shin Megami Tensei 3 Remastered, but 4, I find it to be the most accessible game out of the bunch I have played. And of course, I just say that to everyone: start on easy. Yeah, start on the easiest difficulty. See if you can manage it. And if you can manage it, maybe go up one difficulty. But I just want to let people know that this franchise, it's a punishing franchise. It doesn't hold your hand. If you're stuck in the middle of a maze and you don't seem to get out, and was well, make sure to have a save file before you go into that dungeon. Yep.
Otherwise, you're starting over.
You're starting over that whole game. So yeah, I think Shin Megami Tensei 4 is a good start. And I think also Apocalypse is a great start as well. Even though it's a direct sequel from the 4th game, I find it to be easier to get into versus 4 as well. And they do a recap of what happens in the story. So yeah, I would say either of those two would work great.
Yeah.
To start out with.
For sure. And yeah, I would say, even though I haven't actually played Shin Megami Tensei 4, I probably would have to agree with you from everything I've seen of the game. It just seems like, to your point, it just seems so much more accessible than Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, which is the game that I actually first played back on the PlayStation 2 because it came with Dante from Devil May Cry in the game, Garrett.
Of course.
He was an unlockable character in that version of the game. And oddly enough, with the remaster, he's only unlockable in the PlayStation 4 version and not the
so weird
Nintendo Switch version, which is bizarre. That's neither here nor there. But that was one of the things that really got me into that series. It was like, I'm going to play this game, and got my butt kicked very, very, very quickly, and realized, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this game. So I'd kind of put it down from there. But there was a spin-off series in the Shin Megami Tensei series called the Digital Devil Saga games, which were also on PlayStation 2, where essentially your main characters were basically possessed by demons, and you would actually transform into the demons yourself in combat, which was like an interesting approach to the games. And it actually felt closer to something like Persona as far as exploring the dungeons were in third person. You were and the way you walked around them felt so much more like Persona 3 and 4 versus older Shin Megami Tensei games, which was cool. It was almost like a nice like blend of like the two franchises, which was pretty cool. So that's how I kind of got into the Shin Megami Tensei games, because I really liked Digital Devil Saga a lot. And that made me want to play some of the other ones. But I only really played a lot of the older ones, because I played fan translations of, the Super Famicom games, like Shin Megami Tensei 1 and 2. I played those. I didn't ever finish those, because those are also pretty difficult too.
They're all difficult in general, yeah.
But I mean, there's no easy mode in those ones to kind of rely upon.
Right.
So imagine playing, Shin Megami Tensei 4 on normal or hard, Garrett, and that's probably the difficulty level for some of the older ones. So
right, yeah. At least for the most recent ones, they tell you in the beginning, it's like, hey, the normal mode is like for people who are experienced and want a challenge with the series that are experienced. Easy is for newcomers to the franchise, not the genre, the franchise. So yeah, I would always highly recommend starting out on easy. And that in the easy difficulty, I find it comparable to the normal difficulty of Persona. I find that's the kind of the gap between those two difficulties with those games.
Exactly. So as far as where to start as well, like I would probably agree with you, Garrett, like Shin Megami Tensei 4 is probably where to start if you're not going to pick up the Switch version of 5, because again, from what Nintendo's kind of talked about, like what we saw in Treehouse and stuff like that, I actually think 5 is probably going to be the most accessible entry after it comes out.
I think so too, yeah.
So I do think that's probably the best place to start. But if you wanted to take 5 out of the equation, if you didn't want to pay for a full price game like right away, then 4 is probably your best bet to your point as well. But definitely don't start with 3, because that's not a good place. And probably not Strange Journey either, because again, that one's kind of a weird game on its own, and it's not very accessible either, I don't think.
I played it probably for 5 or 6 hours. It is a first person dungeon crawler. You're gonna have to figure out mazes and maps on top of your difficulty of Shin Megami Tensei. So I would say get into 4, see if you like the mechanics of the franchise first before getting to a spin-off, as we've been describing, like Devil Summoner or Strange Journey.
Exactly. And, actually, the to your point, Garrett, I think maybe even some of the spinoffs might be where you start first and then maybe go to the main series as well. So I wanted to ask you the question, Garrett, and you probably saw it on the doc as well, but what do you think makes Shin Megami Tensei a Shin Megami Tensei game a Shin Megami Tensei game, and how is this different series really different from something like Persona that it kind of birthed? What do you think about this?
Oh, good question. So yeah, of course they're very similar, the Persona games and Shin Megami Tensei. I think what makes Shin Megami Tensei game itself is the mechanics that are brought in, as you said in the beginning with those books. So basically you go into a dungeon filled with demons and devils or whatever. It has some spiritual aspect or spiritual theme into the game. And you have your party, whether it could be friends and it could be all your demons and devils that you friended with. And you go into the dungeon, and you'll go. Sometimes they're random encounters. For 4, you actually see the actual person you slash them, or encounter them or whatever. And basically, you go through the battle of turn-based sequence with your party and yourself. You're actually yourself as a character in the battle. And then there's a series of skills and attack points, very reminiscent to a turn-based game. And then at the end, you can do a few things. You can defeat the monster. You can make them go into your party in some form or fashion, or you can ask them for gold or life or whatever. And so when you get into these negotiations with these demons, you're having a conversation with them. And these conversations with these demons, it depends on their personality, whether it's going to be successful or not. So let's say one demon's like a grumpy person. Yeah. Well, you're going to have to be very patient and nice or whatever with it to get what you want. Sometimes it's not what you expect in the dialogue choices when you're going through this. So the answer that makes most sense is probably not the right answer. Right. It might be these other answers that are in the dialogue choices. So yeah, I think that's kind of what the mechanics are, what makes Shin Megami Tensei a game. On top of that, you got you can upgrade weapons and armor and stuff like that outside. You go back to your home base and you stock up. You progress through the story with your companions as well. So yeah, I think that's what makes Shin Megami Tensei a game. Yeah. Yeah,
for sure. Like it's beyond the mechanics. I would also say, a lot of the story beats are not necessarily super similar between all the games, but you have kind of the same tones and themes between all the games as well. Again, as I kind of mentioned before, most of them are post-apocalyptic games. Most of them take place in Tokyo or, some kind of, post-apocalyptic Japan. And then they kind of go from there, essentially. That's kind of the common theme amongst most of the games. Not all of them, but most of them anyways.
4 is in the feudal age. 4 is like the classical Japan age. And then the Apocalypse is in the Apocalypse. So.
Yeah. Whereas Shin Megami Tensei 3 is actually in the future. And then Shin Megami Tensei 5, for example, the one that's coming up, that's in modern day Japan.
Yes.
So they're kind of all over the place as far as timing is concerned. But I mean, regardless, demons come and bad things happen and Japan usually ends up getting destroyed. That's usually what it boils down to, essentially. But then how it's really different from Persona, one, the difficulty definitely for sure is a step up from Persona's difficulty. Battles in a lot of ways in most of these games, I find, unless 4 is any different from this, Garrett, and you can kind of correct me on this, battles kind of play out in similar fashion to Persona, but you have less of the actions that you have in Persona to make the battles easier. You don't have all out attacks or anything like that.
No, you don't.
And the way the conversations with the demons play out is a little bit different. Likewise, you're not really using you don't have a magic bar that's kind of like the Persona bar to basically use your demon's abilities. The way that you interact with the demons in battle is different from Persona, essentially. So for the most part, the battle itself is similar, but not the same as Persona. But you can definitely tell, when you put those games side by side to each other, the combat feels like they all originated in one place, essentially, and then kind of split off to kind of tweak it for each series, essentially, which is kind of cool to kind of look at. And again, they do this with all the side games for Shin Megami Tensei as well. Again, the Digital Devil Saga games or the Demon Devil Summoner games, they all play, differently from the main series, but they're all kind of rooted with the same idea. And also, it's cool to think about too that I think the Shin Megami Tensei series is one of the first monster capturing RPGs that kind of centers around that, because that became much more popular after something like Pokemon came out. And then you had stuff like Monster Rancher and Digimon and a bunch of other, monster catching series. But Shin Megami Tensei in a lot of ways kind of originated that idea of you going to the dungeon and the way you upgrade some of your stuff is you recruiting your enemies to kind of join you or capturing them, so to speak, which is pretty cool to think about.
Definitely. There's also a fusion of monsters very similar to Persona. And that you actually have to lean on quite a bit in order to get the stronger monsters out there. I feel with SMT4, there's the initial difficulty hump, the first maybe 3 or 4 hours. But once you get past and you got enough armor and gear, you got your monsters that you want, it becomes pretty fun and pretty easy to go through. So yeah, definitely recommend SMT4.
I definitely think like the difficulty curve for most of the games is kind of like that too, where like the first like 5 hours in most of the Shin Megami Tensei games are like very, very, very hard. But once you get used to the mechanics, I think you're probably okay. But I'm going to bring in Seumas MacIsaac once again, at Famous Seumas, who asked the question, do you think the Persona series has somewhat overshadowed the main Shin Megami Tensei series? So we know, Garrett, the Persona series, very, 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 very popular, despite the fact that that popularity doesn't necessarily always translate into sales. And then the Shin Megami Tensei series, I think, sells okay, but for the most part, I think it's probably, I would definitely say much less popular than Persona. So to Seumas' question, I definitely think the Persona series has definitely overshadowed the main Shin Megami Tensei series in a lot of ways, which is just crazy to think about because it was, spawned from Shin Megami Tensei in a lot of ways. Yeah. But what do you think about this question, Garrett?
Well, I definitely agree with you. The Persona series is very popularized compared to the Shin Megami Tensei, but like I'm trying to think from like the developer standpoint and what does it mean to be Shin Megami Tensei versus what it means to be Persona? It's very different things. I think they wanted to serve different audiences, and I think the Persona audience is like the game is very accessible to a lot more players that are into RPGs, but like you don't have to be super into the RPGs in order to like really enjoy that series. Whereas Shin Megami Tensei, it's like it's kicking your butt. Yeah. It's like very hardcore. It's for the hardcore audience, I think, and it's for people that wants a challenge in that genre. So of course, I really think and they pull. I think that's what they do is they pull out that kind of. I don't know, like aura around Shin Megami Tensei that's weird. It's obtuse. And so, it's definitely less popular than Persona series because of that.
And also, too, I think just the tone of the games is very different, too, as far as like the themes and tone of playing through a Persona story is like so much more light and colorful in a lot of ways. For at least most of the Persona games anyways, versus something like Shin Megami Tensei, where it's just very dark and kind of dreary and
it's so weird.
Some of the games are like almost like borderline depressing, especially like a game like 3 was like very much in that direction where essentially the world's ended and you're like a demon that's fused with a human and you kind of just are living your life in a world where no one actually is around and except for these monsters. So I think like there's more of like a dreary like tone to these games versus Persona, which is like bright and colorful, and you have these hip teenagers that are hanging out with each other solving mysteries. Essentially, is kind of the vibe you get from those games. Yes, there's don't get me wrong. There's obviously darker themes in Persona. I know that, but like when you compare it to Shin Megami Tensei's themes, it's very, very, very different from each other. And to your point, they serve completely different audiences from each other. I think. Except for with us, of course, because we like games from both series, so it kind of works both ways. So we should dive into some more of the mechanics, Garrett, and do our usual mechanic breakdown. So again, for the most part, all these games are turn-based games. In fact, unless you're counting any of the side games into this, like they're all turn-based experiences, usually from first person in most of the games. But some of the games take place in third person. For example, with 5 coming out next week, later this week, that's going to be a third person game, which is pretty cool.
4 is third person as well.
Yeah, exactly. But all the games before that, they were all first person RPGs where they were all dungeon crawlers where you were going around in first person, whether it was exploration or combat, it was all in first person for the most part, which is interesting how that's kind of been the case, especially because I'm someone who doesn't really love first-person RPGs. But this is one of the series that I actually kind of got into a little bit that were in that direction. And besides that, we talked about kind of the monster convincing system where you can actually convince monsters to give you gold and stuff like that. As well as in some of the games, again, you can have them as your party members and whatnot. But then is there anything that I'm maybe leaving out from the mechanics that we haven't really discussed yet, Garrett? Because I know we've been talking for a while and we've talked about at least some of them interspiritually.
I think I just want to mention about the pacing of the games. I find it probably on par with Persona, maybe a little slower in the dungeons, and you definitely have to grind. This is not a game that you should try to go straight forward the objective and get like all the way to the end to the boss. And it's like if there's a boss level at the end, it's like you better make sure that your monsters are leveled up as much as they can. Go back to the base as much as you can, and get that going. Because with Persona, I think it was nothing near like that. Where you could probably go through a dungeon and floor by floor and be like pretty. It's not easy, but it's like doable. It's like, okay, I don't have to grind. I just can go to the next level, whatever you want. But the Shin Megami Tensei game is like, no, you better make sure that you are prepared with your items and your monster levels. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more grinding when it comes to this game.
Plus, you're making use of multiple saves. To your point earlier, Garrett,
Yes.
where like you need to make sure to save often in this game.
Yes.
And yeah, you just have to be pretty careful with this game. Again, it feels very old school. Like even the modern entries in the series feel very old school in their game design and their combat. So that's part of the reason why the difficulty is just so high. So I think we've covered most of the mechanical stuff and again, all the stuff that we talked about earlier kind of like crosses over to a lot of the games. So let's move on and talk about some of the spin-offs, Garrett. So first of all, do you have like a favorite spin-off for Shin Megami Tensei, or what do you think about some of the spin-offs from the series? Because I know there's a whole bunch of them. There's Devil Summoner, there's Tokyo Mirage Sessions, there's all kinds of like weird spin-offs for Shin Megami Tensei. What do you think?
I love the spinoffs. I love how they're just testing different mechanics with the games, and I feel like those spinoffs could be a little easier than the actual games themselves. So I played more of Tokyo Mirage Sessions this past week, and I absolutely love that game. It has the style of Persona, but with Fire Emblem characters, but it does have that Shin Megami Tensei, I don't know, like feeling. The skills are the same. The monsters, they're Fire Emblem characters, but it has that UI feel of Shin Megami Tensei that's going to be carried over to 5. So I definitely recommend on Switch, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, #FE. That's clearly another game that could get you into the Shin Megami Tensei series, is that one. I've played a little bit of Devil Summoner, but not too much. And what I recall from it is it's a strategy RPG. More than anything. But again, I haven't delved into it too much, just maybe a few hours, like a year ago. So I can't speak too much on it, but I've heard it's really good. Both of them, Overclocked 1 and then Overclocked 2 is the one on 3DS. So those are the games I would recommend for, I guess, side Shin Megami Tensei spinoffs. Yeah,
and plus, like, kind of to my point about Digital Devil Saga, I actually think that they're probably much more accessible than the mainline games. So if you really want to get kind of a taste for the series, maybe that's where you start versus a mainline game. Besides 5, which again, I'm anticipating 5 is gonna have a lot of tools to make it much more accessible. And I guess we'll find out, by the time the week's over.
Pretty soon.
I'm very excited to actually play it and find out for myself. But yeah, with the spinoffs, I actually really like the spinoffs for Shin Megami Tensei probably more than the mainline games, if I'm being honest. And again, I talked about Digital Devil Saga a little bit. Tokyo Mirage Sessions, I love that game. And again, to your point, Garrett, it really blends like Persona and Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem in this like really nice package that actually, if I was to compare it to another game in the series, it's actually the Digital Devil Saga games. Like it feels like at least the way the combat in that game works is actually very similar to that game. So I actually really like that game a lot, and it's on Switch, so people should definitely check it out. I played the Devil Summoner games back on PlayStation 2, and they are like arena games where essentially like the monsters are in the arena with you. And it's like, again, more of a strategic experience. And man, if you want a game that can kick your butt, those games will definitely do it. They are hard and not easy games to get into. They are also very expensive games on PlayStation 2. They're actually like some of PS2's most expensive games. But luckily, if you have a PlayStation 3, they are on the PlayStation Store for $10 each. So
that's pretty nice.
Yeah, so that's really nice. If you have any interest in ever playing those games, grab them now while you still can, anyways. Because we did get a North American release of those as well around the same time that 3 came out. They came out around the same time, and then a lot of the other series I didn't really get a chance to play a lot of them. So a lot of the spin-offs,
Strange Journey and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But the spin-offs, I think, might be the best way to go for anyone who's new to the series, besides 5, of course, and which we'll probably be talking about later. Because I think we're probably going to end up doing maybe a discussion about 5 at some point after we get a chance to finish it.
I am definitely, I will start Shin Megami Tensei 5 day one.
I know you, me, and Matt over on the PlayStation Drive, we're all like very excited to play that game. So I think we're probably going to have some kind of discussion in the future about that as well. So
sounds good.
Speaking of Shin Megami Tensei 5, Garrett, what do we want to see in Shin Megami Tensei 5? What's on our wish list for things that we want from that game to achieve? Is there anything in particular that like you are excited for Shin Megami Tensei 5? Like what are you most looking forward to with the game, Garrett?
I think the easy answer is more accessibility. Yep. I think we've been mentioning this as an overall theme in the podcast.
Yep.
From what I'm seeing right now in the trailers, the characters, the monsters, it really is looking like, I wouldn't say it's more Persona, but it's being more popularized in general versus the previous games, which I'm really digging. I'm liking the UI changes in the battles as well. So I'm just wondering about what the flow of battle is. They haven't really done too much into it other than just maybe some scenes and maybe some battles here and there. And I'm very interested in what the story is, because it comes from this regular human being until this, I don't know, this demon human blend again. And it's like desert area, but this is like apocalypse. I don't know. I don't know what's going on in this game too. So, which I'm glad. I want to start fresh when I play the game. So yeah, I just want Shin Megami Tensei 5 to be a little bit more accessible to a wider audience, so that people can actually go through this game front to end. Even having an easy difficulty will probably be better. And guys, don't be afraid to put easy on Shin Megami Tensei 5. I'm being serious. Like, these games are not meant to be holding your hand at all. So
unless you're like a Shin Megami Tensei vet, then I would say you're probably okay with starting with normal. But definitely, like, anyone new to this game, especially like it being on the Switch day one, like I think it's going to bring so many more new people in. So there's got to be a lot more options for those players to definitely check out the game. And yeah, I think they'll add them this time around, especially with it being kind of a Switch exclusive at this point, and published by Nintendo in some regions, not all of them, but some of them. So yeah, I'm actually excited for that. And yeah, the story itself, that's what I'm most interested in at this point, because again, we really don't know a lot about it at this point. We just know that, something bad happens in Tokyo as the dudes riding the subway, and then you're this weird, like fused human, then you're recruiting demons to go do something. That's all I kind of know about the story at this point. Because again, it takes place in a bunch of like areas that don't really necessarily look like Tokyo after it's blown up. But yeah, I'm just excited to find out more about the story more than anything. Like, I'm curious to know where they go with the narrative and what the kind of the tone of the story is. At least they showed with the combat this time around, it's not random encounters or anything like that. So they did maintain what they did in 4, where essentially you run up to enemies and whack them essentially. And that's how you start combat, which I think is definitely a better way to do that versus random encounters. And yeah, just for overall, like, at least the presentation of 5 looks pretty awesome. So I'm also hoping that it runs well on Switch as well, because that's something we have been talking about more and more with Switch games, of them running at like 20 or 30 FPS. And I hope this game just runs really well. I mean, it's a turn-based game, so you don't need it to run like at 60 frames per second probably, but I just hope, it is like better.
It doesn't chug. I hope it doesn't chug.
Yeah. Or like, it doesn't have like load times, like long load times or anything like that. Plus, we've only seen like the outdoor areas. We haven't seen like what dungeons are going to look like in this game either. So I'm curious to know what they do with like dungeon design in this game as well, besides, or if there even is dungeons. Maybe you're just in the open world the whole game. Who knows? But I'm excited to play it though and see how awesome it is this week. So we'll definitely be talking about it more in the future. So final thoughts on Shin Megami Tensei, Garrett. And before we kind of get into our overall thoughts on and kind of to wrap up this conversation, let's bring in Seumas MacIsaac at Famous Seumas one more time, who asked the question, do you guys have any favorite characters or demons from the series? So Garrett, do you have a favorite Shin Megami Tensei character? Because like with me personally, I've never become too attached with like any of the characters. from any of the Shin Megami Tensei games. I always find like the stories in the games are more about kind of the world and more about the demons than the main characters themselves in a lot of ways. Maybe 4 is different, but like 3 I definitely felt that way about, and then some of the spin-offs even kind of feel that way too. But what do you think about this question, Garrett?
I totally agree with you. Shin Megami Tensei is not meant to like make you feel attached to any demon or character in general. In 4, there's like you got your main character, then you got your side characters, and there's actually a huge twist at the end with these. So it's actually pretty good character development versus compared to the other games. And then Apocalypse just changes everything. So but I don't particularly have a favorite character that I attach to. But yeah, with demons, it's hard to be attached to as well compared to like, let's say Pokemon, because all you're doing is kind of using them and then you're fusing them to make new demons. And so it kind of reiterates like throughout the game. Like you'll have a demon for like maybe, let's say 5 hours or something like that. And then you're going to use that to fuse it with another demon and poof, you got another demon. Also, a big thing, it's in Persona as well, but when you fuse demons, you like bring skills and traits from the previous up to the new one. Very similar to Persona. But yeah, I agree with you. Like these characters and demons, there's not much attachment other than Jack Frost. So that's kind of like
that was just what I was about to say too. He's like the cornerstone of the series. He's adorable. Yes. He's very adorable. Got his own spin-off game called Jack Brothers, which was on the Virtual Boy, Garrett.
Oh goodness.
It was the Shin Megami Tensei game for the Virtual Boy, which was Japan only, and man, that's a game. Let me tell you what. It's also the most expensive Virtual Boy game as well. So
of course it is.
That's a fun fact because I mean it's an Atlas game. They made like probably like 10 copies of that game. But so yeah, I would say the same thing. Like as far as the demons are concerned, probably Jack Frost. But for the most part, you don't really get attached to them. Again, that's not really the point. For the most part, the story is more about kind of the world and kind of exploring, what's left of it, essentially at that point.
Yeah.
Or trying
dark remnants.
Exactly. And trying to like piece things back together. That's more what the story's about and less about the characters themselves. It kind of reminds me in the way of like what we talked about on the Tales episode, where it's like less about like the one individual person and more about like the world itself and the exploration. That's more of what the story is about. And I would say the same thing about Shin Megami Tensei as well. So, Garrett, final thoughts? Anything we kind of missed or didn't talk about on the episode that you want to touch on before we sign off for the day?
No, I just wanted to say that, guys, I understand we're throwing a big caution behind this series, but it is a very symbolic and, as Ryan said, a very important series in the RPG genre. So I would definitely give Shin Megami Tensei 5 a shot when it comes out. I am personally very excited for it. It looks the most accessible Shin Megami Tensei game to date, and it's looking really good. Especially in the trailers, there's a lot of character voice acting and the UI design. The presentation of it is just phenomenal. So I would just say, I know people out there is going to be new to the series. 5 will probably a great jumping point into it. So yeah, that's kind of like my final thoughts.
Plus, I'm like super excited that we're finally getting a new console Shin Megami Tensei game for the first time in forever. Because like most of the other previous games were all portable. So like this is the first time we've had one on console in a very long time, and the presentation shows. So I'm actually very excited to see what's up with 5 and to go from there. And yeah, I mean it's a series that definitely is important to kind of understanding kind of the history of JRPGs in general, and it's definitely one of the stalwarts. And it's a series that I always recommend that players who want to learn about the history of JRPGs should definitely try at least one of the games at least once.
Yes.
And especially if you like stuff like Persona, I actually think you'll dig Shin Megami Tensei, especially if you played Persona and you're looking for more of a challenge, or if you like the combat on normal difficulty in, let's say, Persona 5, and maybe you don't care as much about the school stuff, or if you maybe even like games like Persona with its combat, but don't like the day or the school stuff, like maybe Shin Megami Tensei is more your style. So
definitely,
you might have overlooked the series because you just kind of put Persona down. But I actually think it's a series that's well worth at least trying at least once for sure to see if it's for you. So there you go. That'll wrap our discussion on Shin Megami Tensei, one of the most important series around. And of course, next week, because this week, of course, we're doing kind of a theme with monster catching games, because this week we talked about Shin Megami Tensei, but next week, Garrett, we're talking about Pokemon. So please be excited for that. But before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
You can follow me at Blind Explosion, and I'm also co-host to Nintendo Shack over at the Play Some Video Games Podcast Network. We go live on Thursday nights over at twitch.tv/PSVG, and you can support us over at patreon.com/PSVG.
Very nice, my friend. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You also find us on Twitter at Yumi Capri's, on YouTube at youtube.com/Yumi Capri, and on podcast services around the globe. So for Garret Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 24th level of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye.
The RPG Cave's mana is fueled by patrons over at patreon.com/Yumi Capri. And I want to say thanks to each and every one of our Patreon supporters for all of your support throughout the years, as well as supporting our independent content. And let's start with by thanking our premium producers, Dallas Ford, Lee Navarro, the fearless leader of the Phoenix Overdrive Extra Life team, and Jonathan Brown. You can find his content over at youtube.com/PM Entertainment. Our platinum producers, Robbie Bobby Mailer and Trucker Sloth. And our gold members, Argo, Brendan Myers, Dallas Robbins, Emily O'Kelly, Heather Boney, James Johnson, Joel Brooks, Jose Jimenez, Mac Time, Benji Kong, Marcus O'Neill, RJ Kern, Dano, Skinny Matt, Mr. and Mrs. Nasty Boots, Foolish Fuji, and Xavier Reyes. Thank you all for all of your support.